Welcome back to Planarchy. I'm Kalin Jordan. I'm here with my co-host Katherine Tipper, and our guest today is Christina Tunison, Managing Director at Strategic Retirement Partners in Washington, D.C. Christina has spent the last 10 years working as a plan advisor and likes to say she grew up on the record keeper side of the industry before transitioning. She holds several industry-specific designations, and she spent 4 years as a board member of WIPN and a mentor in NAPA's Thrive Women's Mentoring Program. We're in the middle of our Women's Retirement Security Day series, and today we're going to go a little deeper into the system itself, how plans get built, what they're optimized for, and what it would take to change the outcomes. Christina, welcome to Planarchy. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
We'll start with an easy, simple question we like to ask everybody. What's your walk-up song right now?
My walk-up song today, and has been for 20 years because I got this asked as an icebreaker back in the day. It's Wu-Tang, Cream, Cash Rules Everything Around Me. It just you gotta it's gotta be money related when you work in finance, right?
Right.
Filippo here very much approves. You've already won over one person in the audience. Okay, so let's talk about the default trap. So you focus on what happens once people are in a plan. What everyone needs to know about a typical default contribution rate, and what does it do to someone's saving over time if they don't choose to contribute more. So the default rate sounds great. Like, I'll do the default. What's the trap in that?
Well, I think what we've seen really over and Catherine, to get nerdy for a second, because you know this, like PPA is coming up on its 20 years anniversary, right? So we have 20 years of default allowances, automatic enrollment, automatic escalation, QDIA. We really saw an uptick in the qualified default investment alternatives, the target date funds, the diversified solutions, right? And then I would say about 15 years ago, we started moving to the implementation of the automatic enrollment, automatic escalation. And I was talking about this yesterday, doing another event. It's really interesting because we kind of went in as record keepers advisors and we said automatic enrollment, and businesses said, I don't know, isn't that going to impact how much I need to match, right? And so we said, how about we just try it at 1% or 2%? So we have a number of businesses that have added automatic enrollment because we very kindly kind of twisted their arms and asked them to do so. But we have a lot of businesses have added automatic enrollment at figures way too low in order to actually get folks to retirement, right? And then I think what we saw over this intervening 15 years was, especially as the generations have changed, just as a reminder to folks listening out there, the millennials are now in their late 40s. They're no longer code for 20 something. But what we saw with the millennials and following with the Gen Zs that are in the workplace is what participants are believing with that information, whatever that default is basically my workplace communicating to me what I should be saving at, right? So especially over the last 5-7 years, we've seen those defaults tick up from maybe what was an average 3% to 6% or greater. And we've seen those escalations step up north of 10% finally. But it has taken us 20 years since PPA, 15 years since we started talking about automatic enrollment to get businesses, I would say, to the low end to where they need to be. And so to expressly answer your question, the default trap is the fact that by plan design alone, if you are not looking at your earnings, looking at your savings, looking at where it needs to be, and kind of taking customized action for yourself, and you're at an organization that put a 3% automatic enrollment in, no escalation, and has never done it, you are frankly just not saving enough for retirement. Now, there's plenty of good things, and I know we'll talk about them during this session about like what defaulted features solve for. I'm actually a super advocate of defaults, but the negative can be that folks are sitting at a 3% into the account and thinking that it's enough, even over 30, 40 years of working, in order to get them 30 years of drawing down that balance.
Yeah, so I totally agree that it sounds amazing because you got people in the plan, and that was and still sometimes is the hardest part.
Right.
But there's always kind of this back idea of set it and forget it, maybe, and set it
Mm.
and forget it is bad, because you're not either increasing the amount or even, God help us, somebody who's like in cash and hasn't really looked at their what they're invested in. I mean,
Right.
it's it solves things, but it's almost counterintuitive that it lulls you into sleep, perhaps, that this is enough.
Well,
So,
and sorry to step on you a little bit, Catherine, but I think that it's one thing if you're in an organization that's a little bit industry cutting, right? Like if you know that your HR folks, your leadership are particularly paternalistic and you're kind of, as I said, looking at the 6, 8 initial enrollment and then a contribution up higher to buy into the idea of set it and forget it. Because again, I really am a raving advocate of the defaults. The problem stems from, especially I would say where you and I specialize in the smaller medium business size space, where they're they're fighting budgetary concerns, like states are increasingly showing up. As you said, Washington DC, I'm technically here in Maryland has a state IRA program that begins at 1 W-2 employee. Like if I'm a small business, I just have a lot of headwinds in trying to be where I need to be as an organization, but also paying my staff and being a profitable business. So those I think are the organizations, unfortunately, that we struggle with sometimes, like getting the line to where they need to be, that they're getting the saving correctly.
yeah. And I also think what's kind of interesting about this a little bit is we always talk about percentages, and percentages, I think people both understand them and don't understand them, right? So 3% is something, but they don't really understand what that ends up meaning over time. And so there's always, whenever we turn something to percentages, which is what we're supposed to do in these things, we kind of lose people sometimes on their understanding. But to flip it to even the employers, what's really interesting is, like, if they have a discretionary profit sharing plan, they can do a dollar amount that's allocated to everybody. I mean, the automatic things we do as percentages as an easy way to do it, but there's ways to make it more hard dollars and make it seem more doable. And so I don't even know, do you think participants would have a clearer idea of what they were doing if they were putting $50 away each paycheck versus 3%? Because 3% just seems, I don't think people understand percentages. They
I
don't mean
agree.
things to them. Do you know?
I like your idea. I think to a certain degree, especially if you're still doing pre-tax, we're still, at least for that first paycheck or two, questioning, like, does $50 mean $50 or does it mean $43.82 after taxes are applied? So there's still a little bit of gray area. I do think that folks like the tangibleness of a dollar figure. I think where we've likely come up with the percentages is so often, and this is where I think we as an industry don't do a great job of talking about the benefits of 401k, because like we do participant education, right? And we say participate and make sure you're getting up to your client's match. Well, as we also know, matches are normally expressed in percentages, right?
Right,
So
right,
I think
right.
a lot of times when we're kind of doing this 3%, 6%, it's because we're benchmarking to the match and not actually having folks have a good understanding of what they should be saving, understanding like what they're on track to replicating kind of as a percentage of their income. But then it unintentionally reinforces too that if my company isn't matching, now, there's no other benefit to the retirement plan than company match. And listen, free money all day. I will never
Right.
tell a company that can
Right.
afford to not, but there is also a huge multi-pronged benefit in just saving your own dollars, whether it's tax deference because you're putting in pre-tax today, future tax deference, the ability to invest in the market, compounded interest, right? And
And
sometimes I
cost
wonder if we
averaging.
don't,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, lose if we don't tie things in to markers again. We do a 3% automatic enrollment because their match is up to 3%, and then reinforce some sort of weird doom loop when we should be touting other figures.
Yep. 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 I totally understand the structure, why it's set up that way, how it helps the people administrating the plan to do things. I mean, for us, it's beautiful for it to be in percentages. I what's always funny is when I talk to normal people who are less comfortable with math, percentages just don't I don't know, they just don't make as much sense to them. And
Yeah.
it's like talking to clients about basis points, and then you lose them even more,
It's not
right?
as
It's
tangible. Like a dollar amount feels more tangible. You know
dollar.
what $50
I
looks like in your hand.
understand what $40 in my pocket is. I
Right.
don't always understand what 3% of my income is, and I think that people don't even understand completely
How to get
how
there from one to
how to
another.
how to get there.
Yeah,
And 3% of what income? Do you know what I mean?
right.
Anyway, I
And
guess I
and
can.
that's where I think maybe some of our record keeper partners could do a better job too, because we just expect them to put a 3% on the website, right? And maybe that translation, especially because yes, it's easier for us, right? But I also think like as both a advisor but a participant in a 401k plan, I know that percentages actually are better for me.
You get a
As I'm
raise.
getting
Yeah.
bonuses, as I'm getting
Yep.
paid, pay increases, as I'm like it's moving the needle over time in a way that $40 per paycheck simply isn't, because so many people forget to come back in. So I wonder if that's not a place where, from an education component, as I said, like our record keeping friends, as they're working on their user experience, could be translating that at the point of implementation, right? You're making $45,000 today. Here is what 3% is going to look like on an annual basis, but here's what you are proposing right now to have come out of your paycheck, so that I know, and I'm not going to pretend to do 3% on the fly of any sort of number that makes sense, but just that I then have that tangibleness of saying this much is coming out, minus or plus a little bit for tax impact once it actually hits its first couple paychecks.
Yeah. I know it's kind of crazy. It's just since I do the payroll, sometimes I have less anxiety with staff if I say, I mean, our safe harbor is set up a specific way, so it doesn't matter. But I
Sure.
mean, of them to say, why don't you make it $50 or $100, and then they know what's coming out of their check? Do you know what I
Right.
mean? So,
Mhm.
so yeah, I'm not looking to change the whole world. I'm just talking about the anxiety that people have on these numbers. So,
I don't know,
okay,
Catherine. Maybe we do need to take over the whole world. Maybe we need to bring some common sense to retirement plan experiences and record keeping.
I support it.
yeah, Kaylin's ready. She'll run my campaign.
I've said it lots of times.
She keeps offering. Okay, Kaylin, what do you think about automation?
Yeah, you mentioned automation earlier, and I would love to understand from you, who benefits from auto enrollment and QDIAs. And like for those who don't know all the acronyms, like what is a QDIA and where does the design kind of break down? I think you sort of got into it, but more on the automation front.
Well, first easy question. So QDIA, Qualified Default Investment Alternative, is the allowance for retirement plans to choose generally a diversified portfolio, not exclusively, but a lot of times some sort of target date fund, right? Where when folks are younger, further from retirement, a higher combination of equities to cash and fixed income. As they get closer to retirement, becomes more conservative, right? So age appropriate, diversified portfolio. I always like to tell people, if you're missing one of what I call the three most important things: you don't have the time, you don't have the money, you don't have the knowledge. Or I'm sorry, you don't have the time, you don't have the motivation, you don't have the knowledge. Like, a target date fund's appropriate for you, right? So the target date fund, the QDIA, goes hand in hand in kind of these automations with the automatic enrollment, the automatic default. Where, and again, as I said earlier, I'm just a really raving advocate for default, because I think so many people, even folks who think they have the knowledge or the motivation, don't necessarily have as much as they think they do, right? And that's not a criticism of them as employees participating in the benefit plan. That's a criticism of us in the industry not doing a great job of helping people understand their benefits, and especially in the plan. And so what automations do, automatic enrollment, automatic escalation, putting into a default, is leveling the playing field. And so I had done a presentation where I dug fairly deeply into kind of slices of Americana. Let's talk, especially as we're here, Women's Retirement Security Day that's coming up, but like gender differences in savings amount, racial differences, ethnicity differences, education differences, LGBTQIA, neurodiversities, really kind of just a lot of slices. And what I would say, prior to kind of the massive adoption of these automatic features, where there were balance lags where you would see, calling a spade, white male 50, 60-year-old balances were significantly, hundreds of thousands of dollars at times, more than whether it would be a woman of a similar age, or a Black person of a similar age, or a Spanish person of a similar age. And so after putting the automatic enrollment, the automatic escalation, putting into a diversified portfolio versus putting in some sort of cash and letting it sit there for 25 years, really the playing field evens out. And it just, to me, speaks to folks aren't sure. Unfortunately, that unsureness, while they're kind of doing a periphery scan to figure out who in their network might be able to answer this question for them, they're not taking action. And then all of a sudden they've been, at their company, where they're working for like 6 months, and they've never enrolled in the 401k plan. And then it just perpetrates, right? So we were having, and especially with the focus on Women's Retirement Security Day, whether it's, I'm not sure how much I can afford to save, I'm not comfortable picking investments. Of the investments I'm picking, I'm having confidence issues on whether those are appropriate for me. Really, across how much should I save and where should I be invested, it was leading to a lot of people just not taking the step to get into the retirement plan, right? And so I think that we've really shown through these default selections that just getting them in the plan, getting employees into the plan, solves a lot of problems towards getting them to where they need to be in order to fund a successful retirement.
So it's amazing to have more people getting in the plan, contributing. What about when people change jobs and the money comes out? What are the issues in terms of, we've talked about confidence and people, is there anything in the statistics that women do different things a little higher with taking money out? Or is there anything that if we make it really easy to get in, we make it auto portability to get out and go in another plan? Is there any traction in any of this that would help women in the retirement security?
I don't have anything at my fingertips to like actually put a fine print on it's this number of percent, right? But we know that women are limited in their participation in retirement. For example, they take time out of I would say the workforce, right? Like using that as kind of code for a career. They take time out of the workforce for caregiving, whether that's having children of their own, they're taking care of a family member, right? So they've taken a step back from a job that has access to an employer sponsored plan. Maybe they're working part time. Maybe that's in a role that an organization has a plan and they don't have enough hours to enroll in, or maybe that's some sort of I'm driving for Uber, I'm driving for DoorDash, where I can pick my hours. I'm not, dependent on somebody to tell me that if I don't come in from Tuesday from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, I'm going to be terminated because I don't know what my day is going to look like. But I'm also considered to be an independent contractor. And therefore, unless I know that I can set, I've basically got I do have a business. I can set up a solo K. Like I don't just go to HR and set up a 401k, right? Um, there, so because of that, because women have the time out of the workforce for caregiving, because they have time out of the workforce for other items, what then happens is that yes, they've got savings. I don't know that the actual process of taking money out of the plan is necessarily any more barriers to entry than anybody else at any other time. But if you need access to funds, right, and you have this pot of money that yes, it's for retirement, but you're 35 and retirement's still 30 years away, you're 45, retirement's still 20 years away, you need money now, that is going to be a source of that you have and can get your finger on. I'll tell you a story. I was speaking at a women's conference, geez, probably 8 years ago, right? And it was like industry specific, but I would say the room that I happened to be in at the moment was fairly younger, earlier. And a woman raised her hand and she said, "We've just had our first baby. We need to free up more cash flow at the moment as a result of that. Where should I take my contribution to?" And I said, can I just pause you for a second? Your partner also working, also have a 401k? And she was like, yep, yes, absolutely, he does. And I say, have you had the conversation with him? Like, this is a household decision. You need to free up more assets. And she's like, yeah, but we need to do it sooner than later. So I know, like, if I do it, it'll
I
get
see.
done, right? Instead of both of us deciding just a little bit, I'm going to take the hit to my account because I can do it sooner. And then,
Right.
like, wish them all the luck in the world. As I said, it's been 8 years. I hope they've gone on to have more kids if they wanted them and they're still happily together. But I think that's another, like, especially in heterosexual relationships, are the doers of the relationship. So then you get this kind of like, yeah, I could talk, but I don't know how quick it's going to happen. So now is another, situation with a lagging balance. Auto
Yeah.
portability, I really, really think that this is going to be effective. I think there are several kind of business reasons it's taking as long as it is. And certainly quite a few of our record keeping partners do have IRA arms where they are rolling over balances. Like if we make it a lot easier to be moving balances between businesses to business, or business plan to employer sponsor plan to employer sponsor plan, obviously that enables another choice that kind of takes potential money away from IRA rollover. That said, I, as part of a target date fund analysis with like my plan sponsors, will look at what their terminated participants' behavior is doing. And Catherine, I'm sure in the analysis that you're doing with plans, we know that quite a few people are actually sticking around, right? So what's the point that I'm trying to make? Terminated participants or not, really the substantial driver on declines. One last point I want to make, and then I'll pause and let everybody else get another breath in. We as an industry talk about the problem with leakage. And I think this kind of nicely ties into what we're talking about right now. So leakage, for those of you who haven't heard the term before in terms of the retirement plan industry, is this idea of taking money out of a plan before you are at retirement age, right? Whether it's justified, my car's transmission just blew up, or not. And I kind of use air quotes to say not, because there's a lot of reasons that folks in the industry are like, you shouldn't give people access to their monies. But I think that they're in, like, if we just look at how much it costs to live today, folks need money, right? And so teeing this up, some plans, because of this concern about leakage, even when folks have terminated, have said you can only take money out of the plan as a full distribution. Like if you've got $30,000 in your account and you're no longer with this organization, it's $30,000 or bust, right? So now I'm driving my car. The transmission did blow up. I
Right.
need $2,500 to solve this, right? And so I'm in a pinch. We're carrying other debt. I can't get some sort of like SoFi or whatever loan. I start eyeing the 401k that I have. I'm no longer there. I have access to it. And what I've seen more often than not is, okay, I can't just get the 2,500. I have to take the first 30,000. But their website says that as long as I roll it over within 60 days, I can keep it invested. So we take the full 30,000. Less possibly if you're in a state where there's a tax withholding. You receive that amount, you solve your immediate problem. But here's where, again, more often than not, the 60 days expired and now you've taken $30,000 out of your retirement plan. Oh, I'm going to spend it while the spending is good because I have it. Let's be honest. When this happens to people, they're not often being like, "Oh, I should set up a savings account." And then just to add insult to injury, the end of the year comes, January comes, you get your 1099 for the distribution from your account, and withholding usually doesn't make up the full amount that you owe on it because it comes to you as ordinary income. So now you've taken the money out of your plan to solve a small problem, and it's become this snowball of a financial situation, right? So again, it's just where I think sometimes that we as an industry have really good intentions and our acting on it causes other problems for other people.
Yeah. It is really interesting. People do need small amounts of money sometime. And it's the reason to have loans. You can have a really big argument that it might be better to take out a 401k loan than it is to go heavy on a credit card.
Right.
But for me, part of this also is just, I think it's intuitive for me. So I'd have to go find, some actual data to it. But it seems to me that people who have less in their accounts tend to think they're not as important. Okay. So if I have $2,000 or $3,000 in an account, it's not that much money when I quit. I think I'll just cash it out. Do you know what I mean? It's more work to go either roll it to the next employer or to go open up an IRA. And I do have some bills that would help with. So in terms of, it's interesting that story you tell about the husband and the wife doing it. I really feel over time her balance could be more susceptible to just short-term crisis issues. Do you know what I mean? And it's there's not an easy solution, but I do think that people do need some access to solve some immediate issues, because otherwise they might say, I don't have enough flexibility if I put my money in a 401k plan. So building some flexibility in it helps. But people do it more in an emergency than long-term thinking. And that's the hard part. So, Kalin, keep going.
Yeah,
What else
I'd
would you
love
like
to
to talk?
ask you about compliance versus outcomes. And when you and I talked before, Christine, I think this was the part that I walked away with, like, that was the most impactful for me. If a plan passes all of its testing, and all of us have been a part of these conversations, so we know firsthand what those kind of conversations look like with clients. But if a plan passes all of its testing, but most participants are still under saving, Do you really consider that a successful plan? And also, what would it take for employers to start optimizing for outcomes instead of just to the minimum compliance that is required for a plan?
I'm gonna immediately say to Catherine, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, like after, because obviously we know that the TPA universe is so intimately embedded in the small plan marketplace. What I have seen with kind of smaller business startup plans is that a lot of times, one, they're not working with an advisor. Not to say that advisors are kind of the sole understanding of plans. If there's a TPA in there, I'm fairly confident. But sometimes when they are working in a bundled environment with solely a record keeper, right? Like they get walked through the plan document from a compliance standpoint. Like it's not actually a consultative conversation. It's you can be between this and that. You can choose A, B, or C, all designed to drive them towards compliance passing, which is great, right? Those of us on the call today know that if you are not taking advantage of available safe harbor uh, benefits that are available within the plan, you have to pass your compliance testing, or there are refunds that are due, right? So the I guess the concern of mine is not the eye towards compliance adherence as much as it seems to be sole eye towards compliance adherence. Here is your box. And I think that as plans tend to grow a bit bigger, they possibly are bringing in a consultant of some size, they are bringing in broader relationships. It's fairly eye opening for them to realize that the universe isn't choice A through C. The universe isn't 2 centimeters big. They really have the ability to get quite creative, and I would say to a certain degree embed their values into the retirement plan. And when they have kind of that consultative conversation with the experts in the room, can understand where they've got a lot of runway to solve problems, or be very paternalistic to their employees, or really kind of identify a benefit but a rewards program within the retirement plan, and other areas that were like, listen, that's not a place that you're just gonna want to tread carefully when you start moving with these levers, but here's the understanding of why, right? So like, are you adamant you want us to play over here, or can we get more runway even over here, and these kind of considerations. But it does tend to feel that, especially in that micro and very small end of small business marketplace, like they're just walked through the discussion with, here, and here's your ability to answer this question very finitely, without any sort of consultative conversation about where they'd like to be or kind of what they'd like to focus on.
Yeah, it's really kind of a tricky subject in some ways. And part of it is, I mean, sometimes it's hard enough to just even have the compliance conversation with a client and get them to pay attention to just getting the plan compliant. And it's weird that people's first initial biases on a plan can be either they want to reduce costs or they want to make something really easy. And
Sure.
and it's another task to have. We've got it going now, let's make it better. And that kind of consulting that they need to think about. And so some of it is easier things to talk about in year 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever those are. I think what's hard in the industry is there's a fair amount of cost compression. And when cost compression happens in a TPA shop, it's harder to do the consulting. But I feel flip side in what's happening in the industry is there's going to be so much compression based off of AI products that they're going to want the consulting. So I'm hoping the pendulum swings back. It it's a tricky conversation to get somebody to really say, let's talk about how to make your plan better in its outcomes. And you know, it's like shifting a conversation when sometimes people are a little bit more like it's a doctor's appointment and I want to get through it. Do you know what I mean? And so,
Absolutely.
do you know, so, but I'd say this whole thing that we're talking about, Women's Retirement Security Day, having a bigger conversation than just we checked off the checklist, we got it all done, we got it through. Phew, 1 year. What are the outcomes we're really looking for, and what are the outcomes in terms of keeping people longer and what it means to have a longer staff? What does it mean if they feel more financially secure and have options? What if they're not panicking that they have to change jobs to get better pay? I mean, all of those things are really well worth talking about. It's getting the plan sponsor to pause and to think about that, right? When I hate to say, a lot of times clients come to us first as going, this is tax savings, and tax savings somehow translates to cost cutting, and it's just muscles being used in the wrong way. Do you know, it's like, let's minimize all the costs here. That's the biggest benefit, when it's like, no, we're talking about the knock-on benefits of doing this well. That's just a different sophisticated kind of conversation, and more than willing to have it. Getting people's attention, just even send us in a census and their, you know, their contributions. You know,
Yeah.
if you're fighting that, you can't. So yes, I agree. Love to have that conversation, and then people would feel like their plan is more valuable to them too, because it's the outcomes are better. So maybe we
I
call Women's Retirement Security Day Better Outcomes for Everyone. I would love that.
really like that.
Sorry,
I think
I went off on a tangent there.
no, I think the other tension too, just from my experience, is who's having that conversation. Like Catherine said, when we're talking to clients, we're just trying to get, usually we spend most of our time, at least I do, can I just get the right information from you so we can move the process forward? And, you know, people want to move quickly, but then they are kind of slow to get you the information you need to set up your plan and everything. But then there's the tension of there's a record keeper, there's an advisor, ideally, and then there's us who's having that conversation about this is what you can do in the plan, but you can do more. And I think a lot of the times I assume that those conversations are more having to happen with the advisor, and less happening with us. But like when Catherine said, you know, maybe year 2 or 3 down the line is the right time to talk about it, that makes a lot of sense to me because they've got their feet wet. They're a little used to running a plan now, and they've kind of seen how it's worked for a few years. Then introducing the conversation of there's actually a lot more you could do for your clients makes more sense to me as opposed to right at the start. But what you
And
said about values, I
I
really identify with, but that seems like you're more well positioned as an advisor to talk about that, Christina, than we would be in the TPA space.
and
Kaylin,
Chris,
can you? Oh, sorry, Catherine. Go ahead.
well, I was going to ask you, Christina, when you see people talk about benchmarking, I feel like
Hmm.
when plans are benchmarked, it's almost always about costs, costs of investments, costs to run the plan, meaning pay the fees. I don't see too much side on the what net benefits have you received as an employer. Do you know what I mean? And even the net benefits of the taxes you've saved, you know, that could be
Hmm.
actually a number. But, you know, you could benchmark. When benchmarking is done, it always seems to be done to show, well, you need to at least be doing what your competitors are doing. But
Right.
that's
Mm.
still not the same as how do you build a plan that allows you to keep and win talent and have a better company. Do you know what I mean? It seems like all the conversations are always kind of aimed towards the lowest common denominator of the conversation, not the highest common denominator. So, um,
Well, and I will say, I think that there have been some structural difficulties in evaluating some of the other benchmarks, right? So, like, we are having a conversation with our plans about what does success look like for your organization, right? Like if we're participation as a percentage here today, where would you like to get to? So it's kind of defining those metrics, defining the line in the sand, and so what actionable steps are we doing to, let's say, move participation from 65% to 80%? Move, it's kind of all these things that we 10 years ago talked about retirement readiness, right? But where I say that there's these structural deficiencies is where you have the ability to benchmark, then we're immediately coming behind and being like, especially those record keepers that have different retirement readiness evaluation. Well, folks are changing jobs at a much faster clip than they've ever did before, right? And to the rollover conversation that we hit on, it's very frustrating because 9 times out of 10 you've got to have a check issued to roll your check over after you make it through the so folks are leaving the assets or they're moving into an IRA. They're not necessarily bringing it into their new employer's plan, right? So now let's say I'm far enough in my career. I'm 36, I'm 37 in my example. I've had 3 jobs. I've just started. And so this system is set up to say, what should a 37-year-old have in terms of assets? I've been there for 6 months. Maybe I have $2,000 in my 401k. And it's like, you've got, this percentage of folks that are in the red or it's raining on them or kind of whatever system is being evaluated from. But then at the same time that we're trying to take actionable steps to help our plans move like the needle, increasing participation, getting average savings up, we're also in the same time kind of excusing this, hey, I just want to let you know it's fine that only 8% of your people are on track for any sort of like actionable retirement, because keep in mind that people have a lot of jobs now and they're not either not acknowledging those assets or they're not rolling it over. So we have these kind of pathways to success, but then immediately hobble them off at the knee because we don't want folks to feel bad that their reporting on retirement readiness is generally showing as poorly as it is. And I don't think that's a small, big business problem. I think that's across the board, right? But also, what is the solution there? Telling everybody to roll their plan over so that we know what it is. And that's its own, I would say, per participant conversation anyway, right? It needs the solution is not necessarily in the plan sponsor's hands, but the takeaway, as I said, being that we're trying to improve metrics while at the same time, even in our own reporting, often discounting when an answer doesn't feel good.
Right. Yeah. And there's always the difficulty of the conversation, the difference between what's information and what's even pulling you further down the fiduciary track. Meaning, human resources, do they have conversations that then make them personally fiduciaries? So there's a lot of that kind of brings us into the next question, which is the knowledge gap. Do you find a correlation between, there's an assumption that people with a lot of money are paying attention and understand what's going on, and people who have less money aren't. Do you find that in your practice?
I am consistently surprised when I would say more group education than individual education, because the type of person who reaches out for individual education is often fairly dialed in to begin with. But at a group education where folks stand up and kind of express like, I don't understand how Roth works. I don't understand things that if I was very intentionally putting together some sort of like multi-presentation, I would consider one-on-one stuff. And that's easy for me to say. I also want to caveat that with saying 20 years in the industry. Like there was a time I didn't know what Roth was either, right? But things that I independent of education, independent of income obtainment, like that somebody will just ask a clarifying question, which I always appreciate. I do not in any way, for anybody watching this, want you to stop asking your questions. But that I'll just be like, oh, you don't understand this at all. And you're an MBA, you're a JD, you're a director of whatever, right? So I say I think that there's a lot of I think that there's the perception when it comes to your retirement plan that everybody else gets this. I am the sole person who has questions. It is me, as Taylor Swift says, I'm the problem. Everybody else understands it. I especially don't want to look stupid to my peers. And so I don't ask questions. And then if at the end of the day I've got more energy, I go to Google and it's written in jargony gobbledygook, right? Like we expect people to show up where we are. So I we as an industry need to do so much better at providing education. And this is where, and kind of like the joke of like, I don't want my AI to write songs or create art. I want my AI to like vacuum the house and do my dishes. I want it to be beneficial, not take the creative side. I do hope that as we see AI launch fully into our industry, that it's a personalization, that we are meeting people where their need is and driving it. I know that there are a number of solutions that are out there. Moneywell, for example, is one that I can think of, which provides text nudges to folks in retirement plans in order to drive them. And then if the user interacts with the nudge, then like there's a little knowledge point that's given, right? So like understanding who the employee is. Do you want an email at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? Do you want a text at 8 o'clock at night? Do you want a cartoon reel on Saturday mornings, right? And like using that direct personalization.
Why are we using cartoon
Yes.
reels? Man.
Right.
The Looney Tunes explanation, right?
I really think that it's not a segment. And this is where I think for women, it shows up as a lack of confidence. But then we have all the surveys that show that men are overconfident when it comes to investing and more likely to lose money because they are, especially compared to their women counterparts, going 100% into an investment and then like a market decline will happen, right? So this is a two sides of the coin problem, and it all boils down to like lack of education in these spaces.
Yeah. We like to ask everybody the same thing, Christina. So we'd love to know, what's a money myth you grew up with that you had to unlearn? And it sounds like there's a lot of them, but I don't know, kind of the top one you can think of.
I think we've danced around it a little bit and here, but I will say a money myth that I had to unlearn, or a money perception that I feel like I came into adulthood with, is that being good with money is solely about discipline, right? And this goes back to the question that we just asked, like, when do people have high paying balances? Surely they're just savers. They're just smart. And I really believe that there is an argument for start early, start easy, automate it for 40 years. And like you can still do the math that somebody career never making over $50,000 will have $1 million in their plan with discipline and continuity. So I don't want to fully poo-poo it, right? But the idea that solely people with discipline are good savers, because I think as we come back to our women as a population, life happens and it happens at you very fast sometimes, right? And you need to make decisions with the limited amount of money, or I'm sorry, the limited amount of information that you have at that time, as much as you can. Hindsight is 2020. And it's not always a discipline problem. You have to play the cards that you were dealt with. And if that includes leaving the workplace involuntarily and not taking 18 months to find a job, if that includes you had a child or children and made a decision with either yourself as a single parent by choice or your partners that you're going to take time from working if somebody in your life required caregiving. Again, life happens. You don't always have the opportunity to go into every life event with one of the doors being everything that I would like to, have happen as a possible option, right? We need to make decisions between sometimes fairly crappy options. And so it was just something that as I've done this, and talked to people saving for retirement, I've really had an appreciation that like life just comes at you, and
Yeah.
there you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good.
Yeah.
Well, we definitely have enjoyed the conversation, your deep dive into this. And we will have links to the Women's Retirement Security Day that we're both on the board on, and big advocates of the education and the help for women to be more aware of what to do in retirement, towards retirement. If you have any more questions, you can always email us at sales@hunterbenefits.com. That's our way in. And Christina, you can always find you on LinkedIn, right? Is that the
They
best way
can
to find you?
they can find me on LinkedIn. Catherine and Christopher have my email address if they need to get a hold of me. And of course, Catherine, Kalin, thank you so much for today. This is such an exciting conversation, and I'm so excited to be part of our upcoming inaugural Women's Retirement Security Day.
Yep.
Thank you. I've been looking
Thank you
forward
so
to this
much.
all week, so we're really happy to have you on.
Fantastic. Thank you.